The night my family decided I no longer belonged, it happened in a room full of people who were smiling at me. That was the part that stayed with me later, not the words themselves, but the way everyone kept eating, laughing, pretending nothing irreversible had just occurred. It was my mother's retirement dinner, held at a private dining room overlooking Lake Mendota in Madison, Wisconsin. White tablecloths, soft lighting, the kind of place chosen to make everything feel official and final. My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 32 years old, and until that night I believed I understood my place in my family. I was the dependable one. The daughter who showed up early, stayed late, handled details no one else wanted to think about. I worked in municipal procurement, a job built on rules, audits, and quiet accountability. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me how systems fail when people treat them casually. My mother, Elaine Whitfield, sat at the center of the table, radiant in a blue dress she had bought specifically for this evening. My father raised his glass and spoke about her decades of service, her integrity, her devotion to family. My older brother Jason nodded proudly beside his wife. My younger sister Brooke scrolled her phone between courses, occasionally looking up to smile when prompted. When the speeches ended, my mother stood again. "There's one more thing," she said, her tone light but rehearsed. "Since I'm officially retired, your father and I have made some decisions about the next phase of our lives." Something tightened in my chest. "We're moving forward with the Community Redevelopment Board," she continued. "Jason will be stepping into a leadership role there. Brooke will be handling outreach." She paused, then smiled at me. "And Nora," she said, "you won't need to worry about any of this anymore. We've simplified things." Simplified. The word echoed uncomfortably. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said. My mother's smile never wavered. "You've always been so busy. We didn't want to burden you." My father cleared his throat. Jason stared at his plate. Brooke finally looked up. "What burden?" I asked. "The trust," my mother said. "The redevelopment fund, the oversight work. We reassigned it." Reassigned. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. "To whom?" She gestured toward the end of the table. "To Martin." I followed her hand and saw him clearly for the first time. A man in his 40s, confident, relaxed, wearing a suit that suggested he belonged exactly where he was. Martin Keller, a former colleague of my mother's, recently reconnected according to her. Someone who understood her vision. He smiled politely at me. "I'm looking forward to working with the family," he said. "Family." I pushed my chair back slightly. "You removed me without telling me." My mother sighed, the sound she used when she wanted to appear patient. "Nora, this isn't personal. We just wanted harmony." Harmony had always meant compliance in our house. "You had me listed as compliance lead," I said. "Legally." That was before she replied. "Things evolve." I looked at my father. "You agreed to this." He hesitated, then nodded. "Your mother thought it was best." Best for whom went unsaid. The rest of the dinner blurred. Applause. Dessert. People congratulating my mother while avoiding my eyes. I left early, claiming a headache. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel until my hands stopped shaking. I wasn't angry yet. I was calculating. At home, I opened my laptop and logged into the city portal I used for work. I searched the redevelopment board filings, something I hadn't touched in months, out of respect for family boundaries. My access still worked. That surprised me. I pulled the latest documents. Amendments. Transfers of authority. My name appeared in earlier drafts, then vanished. Martin's replaced it. But something else caught my attention. The signatures. The dates didn't align. I leaned closer, heart steady now. The filings had been rushed. Authority shifted without proper notice periods. Oversight roles reassigned without conflict disclosures. Procedural violations. Not dramatic ones. Quiet ones. The kind that don't matter until they matter a lot. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. They hadn't just removed me from the family project. They had removed the one person who knew where the weaknesses were. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel compelled to fix it before anyone noticed. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and sat in the dark, understanding something with absolute clarity. This wasn't the end of my role. It was the beginning of theirs. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was panicking, but because my mind refused to slow down. It kept arranging facts the way it always did when something didn't add up. Dates, names, authority chains. I wasn't emotional yet. Emotion came later. First came structure. By 7 the next morning, I was dressed, coffee untouched, on the counter laptop open at the dining table. Sunlight crept across the floor in thin winter lines. Madison was quiet, frozen into that early calm before the city admitted it was awake. I logged back into the municipal redevelopment portal, this time not as a daughter but as a professional. The first thing I did was download everything. Every version of the redevelopment trust documents from the last 18 months. Every amendment. Every board vote summary. I created a folder and named it neutrally the way auditors do. No emotion, no commentary, just records. The pattern emerged quickly. My mother's retirement date had been used as a justification to fast-track decisions. Authority was reassigned under an operational continuity clause that technically applied only if a board member was incapacitated. Retirement did not qualify. Neither did convenience. Neither did trust. Martin Keller's name appeared repeatedly as interim advisor, then strategic lead, then acting compliance liaison. Each title granted him slightly more reach. Each expansion skipped a step. I had written the original framework years ago. I knew where flexibility ended and where violations began. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. "Brooke, you left early last night," she said. "Mom was upset." "I was surprised," I replied. She sighed. "You always take things personally." "I was removed from a legal role without notice," I said. "That's not personal, that's procedural." She scoffed lightly. "You and your rules." "Rules are why nothing collapsed," I replied. She didn't answer that. "Martin is just helping," she continued. "Mom finally feels supported." The words landed with more weight than she realized. Supported how I asked. Brooke hesitated. "He listens. He doesn't question everything." I closed my eyes. Questioning had always been framed as disrespect in my family, even when it was the only thing keeping them safe. "Does he know about the zoning covenants tied to the lakefront parcels?" I asked. Silence. "Brooke," I pressed. "I don't know," she admitted. "That stuff is boring." "Boring things are usually expensive when ignored," I said. She laughed nervously. "You're overthinking this." "No," I said. "I'm seeing it clearly." After the call, I drove to City Hall. I hadn't planned to. My feet just carried me there, guided by instinct and experience. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Familiar. Grounding. At the clerk's office, I requested public records related to the redevelopment board. The woman behind the desk recognized me. "Back on the Whitfield project?" she asked. "Just reviewing," I said. She nodded sympathetically. A lot changed quickly. "Yes," I replied, "it did." She printed a receipt and slid it across the counter. "There's been chatter." "About what?" I asked. She lowered her voice slightly. "About how fast approvals were pushed through. Some people are uncomfortable." I thanked her and left. Outside, the cold bit sharply at my cheeks. I welcomed it. Physical sensation kept me anchored. By the time I returned home, an email waited in my inbox. From Martin. Subject: looking forward. The message was cordial, smooth, carefully non-confrontational. He thanked me for my past service, said he hoped there were no hard feelings, expressed enthusiasm about streamlining operations. He ended with, "If you have any historical context that might be helpful, feel free to share." I stared at the screen. They had removed my authority, but still wanted my knowledge. The pattern was so familiar it almost felt comforting. I did not reply. Instead, I opened a new document and began outlining potential exposure points. Conflicts of interest, disclosure failures, timing irregularities, nothing speculative, only facts. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't plotting destruction. I was doing what I had always done. Observing, documenting, and deciding when to stop intervening. That evening my father called. "You didn't need to make a scene," he said quietly. "I didn't," I replied. I left. "You embarrassed your mother," he continued. "I was embarrassed," I said. "There's a difference." He sighed. "Martin knows what he's doing." "Does he?" I asked. "Yes," he said firmly. "He's confident." Confidence was never the same as competence. I had learned that lesson early. "I hope you're right," I said. When we hung up, I sat alone in the dim apartment, the city humming softly outside. For the first time since the dinner, emotion crept in around the edges of my clarity. Not rage, not grief, something colder. They hadn't just removed me. They had assumed I would still protect them without the authority to do so. That assumption was about to cost them more than they understood, and I was finally willing to let it. The first formal notice did not come from the city or the board. It came from a bank. I was at my desk at work when the email appeared flagged as informational and addressed to the Redevelopment Trust's former compliance contact, me. The subject line was bland enough to be ignored by anyone who did not understand what it meant. Notice of Account Authority Update Confirmation. I read it twice. The bank was confirming that recent changes to authorized signatories had been processed. Martin Keller was now listed as primary operational authority on 3 redevelopment accounts, including the restricted escrow tied to the lakefront parcels. Restricted escrow. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. That account was governed by covenants so specific I had once joked they were written to catch human error like a trap. Funds could only be moved under narrowly defined conditions, with layered approvals and notice periods. I opened the attachment. The authorization date was backdated by 6 days. My pulse remained steady. Backdating was not dramatic. It was common. It was also illegal when used to simulate compliance that did not exist at the time of action. I forwarded the email to my personal archive and closed my work inbox without replying. That evening, I drove past my parents' house. I did not stop. I did not knock. I parked across the street and sat in my car watching the lights through the front windows. Shadows moved inside. Laughter drifted faintly when a door opened. They looked peaceful. Martin's car was in the driveway. That detail mattered. I drove home without confronting anyone. At 10:30, my mother texted me. "You've been very quiet today." "I've been busy," I replied. With what she asked, I considered the question. Listening, I typed back. No response came. The next morning, a second message arrived from the bank. This one was more direct, routed to a compliance distribution list that still included my email address, because no one had bothered to update it. Urgent clarification requested regarding escrow movement. They were asking for confirmation that certain prerequisite notices had been issued prior to a scheduled fund transfer, notices that I knew with certainty had not been sent. The transfer was scheduled for the following Monday. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This was the moment I had spent my entire career preventing. I could call the bank. One phone call would stop everything. I could explain the oversight request, a pause, guide them through corrective steps. No one would ever know how close it had come. I didn't move. At lunch, my brother Jason called. "Mom says you're sulking," he said without greeting. "I'm working," I replied. He laughed dismissively. "On what you don't even have a role anymore." "That's true," I said. "So why are you still hovering?" he pressed. "I'm not," I replied calmly. "I'm observing." "You always do this," he snapped. "You wait for something to go wrong so you can say you were right." "No," I said. "I wait to see if people will do what they said they were capable of." He scoffed. "Martin knows what he's doing." I let the silence stretch. "Does he know about the escrow restrictions?" I asked. Jason hesitated. "I don't know." "Why would he need to?" "Because the transfer you're planning can't legally happen yet," I said. There it was. "What transfer?" he demanded. I smiled faintly unseen. "You should ask Martin." The call ended abruptly. That afternoon, Martin emailed again. Subject: quick question. He asked whether certain notices were more of a best practice or a hard requirement. The wording was careful. Plausible deniability wrapped in professionalism. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote one sentence. "They are mandatory under the trust covenants." I did not elaborate. I did not explain how to comply. I did not offer to help. His reply came 15 minutes later. "Thanks, we'll handle it." Handle it. The phrase echoed uncomfortably. That night, my father called. "Your mother is worried," he said. "She thinks you're pulling away." "I am," I replied. "Why?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Because I was told I was no longer needed," I said. "I'm respecting that." He sighed. "You don't have to make this difficult." "I'm not," I said. "I'm making it accurate." He didn't understand the difference. On Sunday evening, my phone buzzed again. "Unknown number," I answered. "This is Martin Keller," a smooth voice said. I wanted to clear the air. "Go ahead," I replied. "I sense some resistance," he continued. "I hope we can be collaborative." "Collaboration requires shared authority," I said. "You have it. I don't." A pause. "You still have institutional knowledge," he said. "It would be unfortunate not to use it." "Knowledge without authority becomes liability," I replied. "I won't assume that." Another pause, longer this time. "You're being inflexible," he said. "No," I corrected. "I'm being precise." The call ended shortly after. On Monday morning at 8:12, the bank sent a third email. "Transfer pending confirmation." I closed my laptop and sat still. For the first time, the system was about to experience my absence, not as inconvenience, but as consequence. And I was done stepping in front of it. The transfer did not go through. At 8:37 on Monday morning, the bank placed a temporary hold on the escrow account. It wasn't dramatic. No alarms, no accusations. Just a quiet administrative freeze triggered by missing documentation that could not be waived or assumed. The kind of safeguard most people forgot existed until it stopped them cold. I knew because the fourth email arrived at 8:42. Status update escrow. Hold implemented pending compliance review. I read it once, then closed my laptop. For the first time since the retirement dinner, I felt something close to relief. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Relief that the system was doing exactly what it was designed to do when no one interfered. My phone rang less than 5 minutes later. "Jason, what did you do?" he demanded. "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly. "You talked to the bank," he accused. No, I said. They emailed me. That's the same thing, he snapped. It isn't, I replied, and you know it. He cursed under his breath. Martin says the bank is overreacting. The bank doesn't react, I said. It verifies. He fell silent. What does this mean, he asked. It means someone tried to move restricted funds without satisfying conditions, I said, and now they have to explain why. You could fix this, he said again, desperation creeping into his voice. Just tell them it's fine. It isn't fine, I replied. That's the point. He hung up. At 9:15, my mother called. I let it ring. At 9:17, she called again. I answered. What is happening? She asked, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. A compliance hold, I said. Temporary, procedural. Martin said everything was in order, she snapped. Martin was wrong, I replied. She inhaled sharply. You knew this would happen. Yes, I said. And you didn't stop it, she said, voice shaking with anger now. No, I replied. I didn't. How could you do this to us? She demanded. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the gray winter light outside my window. You removed my authority, I said. You told me I was no longer needed. This is what that looks like. This affects the entire project, she said. The city, the donors. Yes, I agreed. That's why the rules exist. You're being vindictive, she accused. I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. Vindictive would be interfering. I'm abstaining. She made a sharp, frustrated sound. You're enjoying this. I'm not, I said honestly. I'm watching it. The call ended abruptly. By noon, the ripple effects had begun. The redevelopment board scheduled an emergency meeting. The city requested clarification. Donors began asking questions, polite ones at first, the kind that grew sharper with each unanswered email. Martin emailed me twice. The first message was clipped professional, asking if I had any insight into why the bank might have acted prematurely. I did not reply. The second email arrived an hour later, less composed. Subject: need your input. ASAP. He asked whether there were historical nuances he might have overlooked, whether I could walk him through the escrow requirements quickly so the delay could be minimized. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I closed the email. At 3 o'clock, my father came to my apartment. He looked tired, older than he had a week ago. The confident calm he had worn for years had cracked under the weight of uncertainty. You didn't have to let it get this far, he said quietly once we were seated. I didn't let anything happen, I replied. I stopped preventing it. He rubbed his hands together. Your mother is beside herself. I know, I said. She feels betrayed, he continued. I met his eyes, so did I. He flinched. Martin assured us he understood everything my father said. He said you were overly cautious. Caution is what keeps people out of hearings, I replied. He sighed deeply. Can you help us now? The question hung between us, heavy with years of expectation. I thought carefully before answering. I can explain the requirements, I said. I can outline what needs to be done. But I will not speak on your behalf, and I will not take responsibility for decisions I don't control. He nodded slowly. Your mother won't like that. That doesn't make it wrong, I said. He agreed reluctantly. That evening I sent one email. To Martin, to the board, to the city compliance officer. It was brief, factual, clinical. I listed the missing notices, the violated timing requirements, the corrective steps required to lift the hold. No commentary, no guidance beyond what the documents already stated. Then I stepped back. The response was immediate. Confusion. Scrambling. A flurry of internal emails forwarded accidentally to me, revealing panic beneath polished language. Martin's authority was questioned. The board demanded explanations he could not give without implicating others. By nightfall, the emergency meeting had ended without resolution. The escrow remained frozen. I stood at my window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, feeling something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not anger, not fear, clarity. They were finally experiencing the system without me cushioning its edges. And this time I was not stepping in front of it. By Tuesday morning, the language around me had changed. No one was saying mistake anymore. No one was saying delay. Words like exposure, liability, and disclosure had begun to surface in emails that were never meant to reach me, but somehow did. Forwarded accidentally, copied reflexively, the kind of errors people make when their confidence collapses faster than their habits. At 8:10, an agenda for a special redevelopment board session appeared in my inbox. Emergency compliance review, attendance mandatory. My name was not listed as a participant. That more than anything else told me how deep the panic had gone. I made coffee and sat at my table reading through the materials attached to the agenda. They were thin, repetitive, defensive. Martin had framed the escrow hold as a procedural misunderstanding and emphasized that corrective notices were already in progress. In progress was a phrase people used when they had no proof. At 9:30, my mother called again. I let it ring. At 9:32, she left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it. At 10:05, my father texted. Please, just talk to her. I typed, deleted, typed again. I will speak when there is something new to say. The board meeting began without me. I knew because Daniel texted from inside the room. This is bad. They're asking about past approvals. That message mattered. Past approvals meant history, and history was where I lived. At 10:47, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. City Compliance Office. I answered. This is Nora Whitfield, I said. Ms. Whitfield, the woman on the line said, calm and precise, we're reviewing redevelopment filings connected to the escrow hold. Your name appears on earlier compliance certifications. We were hoping to clarify a few points. Yes, I said, I can answer factual questions. She paused briefly. To confirm you are no longer acting in an oversight capacity. That's correct, I replied. My authority was formally reassigned last week. Understood, she said. Then we'll proceed accordingly. The call lasted 11 minutes. She asked about timelines, notice requirements, prior remediation steps. I answered each question without commentary or interpretation. Just facts, dates, processes. When the call ended, I felt something shift again. Not relief, not vindication. I felt distance. By noon, the board meeting had adjourned without consensus. The escrow remained frozen. The city requested written explanations. Donors requested assurances. The bank requested sworn confirmation that no funds had been improperly accessed. Martin emailed again. Subject urgent coordination needed. This time there was no pretense of ease. He asked if I would join a call to align messaging before regulators escalated. The phrase align messaging stood out like a warning flare. I replied with one sentence. I will not participate in messaging. No response came. At 1:30, Jason showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked like someone who had finally realized the ground beneath him was not solid. They're talking about formal investigation, he said the moment I opened the door. Yes, I replied. You could stop this, he insisted. No, I said calmly, I could delay it. He paced my living room. Mom is panicking. She says you're punishing her. I sat down. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm not absorbing consequences that aren't mine. He stopped pacing. That's the same thing. No, I replied. Punishment is intentional harm. This is withdrawal. He stared at me, struggling with the concept. You always wanted control, he said finally. I smiled faintly. If I wanted control, I would still be involved. That shut him up. At 3 o'clock, the first donor withdrew conditional support. Not publicly, not loudly, just a quiet email stating that pending clarity funds would remain uncommitted. The foundation's cash flow tightened instantly. At 4:15, my mother arrived. She didn't knock. She rang the bell and then knocked anyway, her movements sharp, frantic. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered, not weak, reduced. You're tearing this apart, she said. No, I replied. I stopped holding it together. She pushed past me into the apartment. You think you're so righteous. I closed the door calmly. I think the rules matter. You're doing this because you were hurt, she accused. I was removed, I corrected. Those aren't the same. She laughed harshly. You're always so precise. Yes, I said. That's why nothing collapsed before. Her face twisted. We trusted you. You trusted me to fix things quietly, I replied. Not to be respected. Silence fell between us. Finally, she asked the question she had been circling all day. What happens next? I answered honestly. Next, the city reviews the filings. The bank maintains the hold. The board decides whether Martin is still fit to act. And donors decide whether they believe your assurances. She sank into the chair opposite me, and I stay where I am, I said. Out of it. Her voice dropped. If you step in now, you could save us. I met her eyes. If I step in now, nothing changes. She understood that. I saw it register painfully slowly. When she left, it was without shouting, without threats, just exhaustion. That night, I sat alone, watching snow begin to fall outside my window, each flake quiet and individual, accumulating without drama. The system was moving, and for the first time in my life, I was not chasing it, correcting it, or cushioning it. I was letting it work. By Wednesday morning, the word investigation was no longer whispered. It appeared plainly in subject lines printed in neutral fonts, carried without emotion the way institutions carry weight. The city had opened a formal inquiry into the Redevelopment Trust's handling of restricted funds. Notices were issued, timelines established, requests documented. No one accused anyone yet. That would come later after facts were assembled and excuses exhausted. I found out the same way I found out everything now. Quietly, indirectly. An automated notification copied to my email because no one had thought to remove me from legacy distribution lists. Formal inquiry initiated reference number, CRI 241-SIN. I closed the message and went for a walk. The air was sharp. The sidewalks edged with old snow turned gray from traffic. Students passed me on their way to class, headphones and faces forward, lives intact. I felt oddly invisible among them, and for the first time that invisibility felt like safety. When I returned home, my phone was vibrating on the kitchen counter. Martin. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. I deleted it without listening. 10 minutes later, my father called. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice strained but controlled. "We need to regroup." "There is no regrouping," I replied. "There is review." "You're being rigid," he said. "I'm being accurate," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "Your mother thinks you planned this." I paused. I planned my absence. "That's the same thing to her," he said. "I know," I replied. He hesitated. "They want to suspend Martin." That was new. "On what grounds?" I asked. "Failure to follow compliance protocols," he said quietly. "They're saying he exceeded his authority." I leaned against the counter. "Did he?" There was a long pause. "Yes," my father admitted, "but he was trying to move things forward. That's how violations usually begin," I said, "with good intentions and no guardrails." "He's blaming you," my father added. I smiled faintly. "Of course he is." At 11:30, an email arrived from the redevelopment board chair. Subject: request for clarification. She asked whether I would be willing to submit a written statement outlining my historical role and confirming the point at which my authority ended. No accusations, no pressure, just documentation. I agreed. I spent the afternoon drafting the statement. It was clean, chronological, impersonal. I detailed my responsibilities, the safeguards in place during my tenure, the date I was removed, and the lack of overlap or transitional authority afterward. I did not criticize anyone. I did not speculate. I did not offer solutions. I submitted it and closed the document. At 3:15, Jason texted me again. "They're throwing Martin under the bus." I stared at the message. That was always the plan. At 4, my mother arrived again. This time she knocked. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly, looking around as if the room were unfamiliar, even though she had helped me choose the furniture. "They're saying he acted alone," she said. "Did he?" I asked. She pressed her lips together. "We trusted him." "Trust is not authorization," I replied. She sat down heavily. "They want us to sign a statement." I waited. "One that says he misunderstood his role," she continued. "That we were misled." I met her gaze. "And is that true?" Her eyes flickered away, not entirely. I nodded. "Then don't sign it." She laughed bitterly. "You think it's that simple?" "Yes," I said. "It's just not painless." She looked at me, then really looked at me as if seeing the distance for the first time. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. I stopped compensating. Her voice cracked. "If we don't sign, this could ruin us." "If you do sign," I said gently, "it will ruin someone else." She stood abruptly. "You always make everything moral." "I make it factual," I replied. "Morality is what people feel when facts land." She turned toward the door, then stopped. "Do you feel nothing?" she asked. I thought about it. "I feel clear," I said. She left without another word. That evening, the board voted. Martin Keller was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. The announcement was brief, clinical, no blame assigned yet, but the implication was unmistakable. Power had shifted. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. I turned it face down and sat by the window watching the city settle into night. For years, I had been the quiet correction, the unseen hand smoothing rough edges before they cut anyone. Now the edges were exposed, and instead of bleeding, the system was finally cauterizing itself. I went to bed that night without anxiety for the first time since the dinner. Not because the situation was resolved, but because it no longer belonged to me. The morning after Martin's suspension, the silence was unmistakable. No frantic calls, no rushed emails asking for clarification or help. The absence itself carried meaning. When power shifts abruptly, people pause. They reassess who is safe to speak to, who is dangerous to ignore, and who no longer matters at all. I mattered again, just not in the way my family expected. At 8:45, an official notice from the City Compliance Office arrived in my inbox addressed to current and former oversight personnel. It outlined the next phase of the inquiry. Individual interviews, document reconciliation, a preliminary determination window of 60 days. My name appeared under former compliance lead available for factual testimony. Not responsible, not implicated, available. That distinction mattered more than anything else. I printed the notice and set it aside, then dressed for work. My job, my real job, had continued quietly through all of this. No one there asked intrusive questions. They didn't need to. They understood how systems failed when families confused loyalty with governance. At 10:12, my phone buzzed. "Daniel, they've isolated Mom," he said. "The board isn't returning her calls." "Yes," I replied. "They're treating her like a risk," he continued. I closed my eyes briefly. "She is one, right now." He sounded angry. "You talk about her like she's a problem, not a person." "I talk about her like someone who held authority without accountability," I replied. "That's not personal. It's structural. He scoffed. You always hide behind language. And you hide behind denial, I said. The call ended. By lunchtime, the first local reporter reached out. A polite email asking whether I would comment on the redevelopment trust investigation. I declined without explanation. Silence in moments like this was not avoidance. It was positioning. At 1:30, my father called. He didn't waste time. They're asking us to step down, he said. I sat down slowly. From what? The advisory committee, he replied. All of it. They want a clean separation while the inquiry continues. That makes sense, I said. He laughed bitterly. You sound like this is just another meeting. It is, I replied, just with consequences. He sighed deeply. Your mother is furious. She says this is humiliation. It's exposure, I said. Humiliation is what it feels like. Silence stretched between us. She thinks if you speak publicly, defend her intentions, it could soften this, he said carefully. I had been expecting that. No, I replied. She devoted her life to this, he insisted. And she removed the person who ensured it stayed compliant, I said. Those two facts coexist. He sounded tired now. Is there anything you would do? I considered the question honestly. I will answer direct questions from regulators, I said. I will not defend narratives. He nodded slowly, even though I couldn't see it. She won't understand that. I know, I replied. At 3 o'clock, the city scheduled my interview. Friday morning, 9 sharp, conference room B. Bring any documentation I deemed relevant. I smiled faintly. They didn't need me to bring anything. They already had it. But the invitation mattered. It confirmed what I had known since the escrow froze. The system knew exactly who had been stabilizing it. That evening, my mother came again. This time, she didn't knock or ring. She stood outside the door until I opened it, as if waiting for permission that had never existed before. Her posture was rigid, controlled, the way she looked when she believed restraint would still win. They're dismantling everything she said. No, I replied. They're isolating risk. She laughed sharply. You talk like you're not part of this. I'm not, I said. She stepped inside, pacing slowly. They're rewriting history, acting like Martin did everything alone. Did he? I asked. She stopped pacing. You know it wasn't that simple. Then tell the truth, I said. She shook her head. The truth ruins people. No, I replied. Lies do. The truth just ends them. She stared at me, eyes flashing. You wanted this. I met her gaze evenly. I wanted to stop being responsible for what I didn't control. She scoffed. Same thing. No, I said. Opposite. Her voice dropped. If you testify, everything changes. Yes, I replied. For us, she emphasized. I nodded. For everyone. She took a shaky breath. If I ask you not to. I waited. Will you still go? She finished. Yes, I said. Her shoulders slumped just slightly, the smallest fracture in her certainty. You're choosing strangers over family, she whispered. I answered calmly. I'm choosing truth over comfort. She left without another word. On Friday morning, I sat in the conference room across from 2 city investigators and a recorder blinking red on the table. They asked me to begin at the start, so I did. I explained my role, the safeguards, the boundaries, the moment authority was removed, the emails, the notices, the absence of required disclosures. I didn't editorialize, I didn't accuse, I didn't defend. I told the truth the way systems understand it. When the interview ended, one of the investigators looked at me carefully. You stepped back at exactly the right time, she said. Yes, I replied. Why, the other asked. I thought for a moment. Because I said continuing would have made me complicit. They nodded. As I left the building, the cold air hit my face, sharp and clarifying. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting it settle. The fallout was no longer theoretical. It was moving. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was already out of the way. The first resignation happened quietly. It wasn't announced. It wasn't leaked. It appeared as a single-line item in the city's weekly administrative bulletin buried between zoning variances and parking ordinance updates. Resignation accepted. Elaine Whitfield, Community Redevelopment Advisory Committee. I read it once, then again, feeling nothing at first. No relief, no vindication, just recognition. This was the moment my mother had spent her entire career avoiding. Not removal. Voluntary departure under pressure. The illusion of choice preserved just enough to save face, but not enough to save power. My phone buzzed less than a minute later. Jason. She stepped down, he said flatly. Yes, I replied. She says it was strategic, he continued. Temporary. Nothing about this is temporary, I said. He exhaled sharply. They're circling Dad now. That was always next, I replied. The investigation didn't accelerate after my interview. It didn't need to. Momentum had already shifted. Once authority fractures, everything downstream begins to loosen. People remember emails they forgot. They forward documents they hesitated to share. Silence becomes riskier than disclosure. At 10:30, I received a follow-up request from the city. Additional clarification requested regarding historical donor restrictions. I answered in writing. Again, facts only. At noon, my father called. They're asking me to submit a statement, he said. I expected that, I replied. They want details, he continued, about who approved what. Yes, I said. He hesitated. Your mother thinks this is punishment. I leaned back in my chair. This is process. She doesn't see the difference, he said quietly. I know, I replied. That afternoon, Martin Keller's name surfaced again. Not in accusation, but in documentation. The board had requested his full correspondence related to escrow planning. Emails, texts, drafts, notes, everything. The illusion that he had acted alone collapsed within hours. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered. This is Martin, he said, his voice tight. No trace of the confidence he had worn so easily weeks earlier. I need to talk to you. You can email, I replied. This can't be written, he said. That's exactly why I won't do it by phone, I replied. Silence. They're trying to make me the fall guy, he said. I closed my eyes briefly. They always were. You could help clarify, he pressed. You know how decisions were made. I know how authority was assigned, I replied, and it wasn't yours alone. You're enjoying this, he snapped. No, I said calmly, I'm refusing to absorb it. He hung up. At 3:45, the city issued a preliminary finding. No conclusions yet, but concerns were formally noted. Procedural failures, oversight gaps, governance weaknesses. Weaknesses, plural. That detail mattered. My mother arrived at my apartment just after 6. She looked exhausted. Not frantic, not furious, just worn down by resistance she could no longer outmaneuver. They're saying I failed to supervise, she said. That's accurate, I replied gently. She winced. You always say things like that, so clean, so cutting. I say them because they're true, I replied. She sank into the chair across from me. If I admit that everything collapses. If you don't, I said it still does, just louder. She looked at me, then really looked at me without calculation. I thought replacing you would simplify things, she said. I nodded. It simplified control. She swallowed. I didn't realize how much you were holding. That's because I never advertised it, I replied. Silence settled between us, heavy but different now. Not confrontational, resigned. They want a public statement, she said finally. I waited. One that says I take responsibility, she continued. That I made mistakes. Yes, I said. And they want me to say you had no role in what happened, she added. I met her eyes. That part is also true. She looked surprised. You'd let me say that? Yes, I replied, because it's accurate. I stepped away before anything happened. Her shoulders sagged. You won't save me, she said softly. No, I replied, but I won't destroy you either. She nodded slowly as if accepting something fundamental. That night, the statement was released. Elaine Whitfield accepted responsibility for oversight failures, expressed regret, pledged cooperation, stepped away from all advisory roles pending final review. The response was muted, respectful, cold, the kind reserved for people whose era has ended. I watched the announcement scroll across my screen, then turned the phone face down. For years I had believed my role was to prevent collapse at all costs. Now I understood something else. Collapse isn't always failure. Sometimes it's correction. And for the first time since the dinner by the lake, I slept without dreaming. After my mother's statement was released, the world did not end. That was the first surprise. No protests, no angry crowds, no dramatic headlines looping her face across the evening news, just a brief article, a few cautious follow-ups, and then a collective pivot toward what would happen next. That was the second surprise. People moved on quickly once authority was stripped of mystique. Without power, without access, without the ability to influence outcomes, my parents became background figures, not villains, not martyrs. Just former decision-makers whose time had passed. For me, the days that followed were strangely quiet. I went to work. I answered emails. I reviewed contracts. I cooked simple dinners and ate them standing at the counter listening to the low hum of the refrigerator. Life did not feel triumphant. It felt recalibrated. On Monday morning, I received an email from the City Compliance Office. Final interview request. Purpose clarification and closure. I read it carefully. They wanted one more meeting. Not to investigate, to conclude, to confirm boundaries, timelines, and responsibilities so the final report could be written cleanly. I agreed. The interview took place 2 days later in the same conference room as before. The same recorder, the same neutral expressions. This time the questions were fewer. Can you confirm the date your authority ended? Yes. Can you confirm you did not authorize any fund movement after that date? Yes. Can you confirm you were not consulted prior to the attempted transfer? Yes. Each answer was simple, undeniable. At the end, one of the investigators leaned back slightly. You understand, she said, that your withdrawal exposed structural weaknesses that had existed for years. Yes, I replied. Do you feel responsible for the outcome, she asked. I considered the question longer than the others. I feel responsible for my choices, I said, not for other people's refusal to adapt. She nodded, satisfied. When I left the building, I felt something I hadn't expected. Lightness. Not relief exactly, release. That afternoon, my father called. He sounded older than ever, not weak, just unguarded. They're closing in on the final report, he said. I know, I replied. They're recommending permanent governance changes, he continued. External oversight. No family roles. That's appropriate, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I should have backed you, he said finally. I closed my eyes. Yes, I replied, you should have. He didn't argue. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. You don't, I said gently. You live with it. He sighed. Your mother is struggling. I know, I replied. She keeps saying she didn't mean to push you out, he continued. I stared out the window at the street below, people moving through their days without knowing anything about us. Intent doesn't erase impact, I said. You taught me that. He had, years ago, about something else, something smaller. I wondered if he remembered. After we hung up, I sat for a long time without moving. The final report was released the following Friday. It was thorough, balanced, unsparing. Procedural violations confirmed, oversight failures documented, no evidence of criminal intent, corrective actions mandated. My parents' names appeared in the report, but not dramatically, not highlighted, just listed where responsibility belonged. My name appeared once. Former compliance lead, no fault found. That was it. No footnotes, no commentary. A clean line. Jason texted me that night. It's done. Yes, I replied. Mom says you could have handled this differently. I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. I handled it honestly. He didn't reply. The following week, the Redevelopment Trust announced its restructured leadership. New chair, new compliance firm, new reporting cadence. The work continued. Projects resumed. The lakefront parcels would be developed eventually, just under rules that could no longer be bent quietly. I walked past the lake one evening as the sun dipped low, the water reflecting pale gold and gray. I thought about how much of my life had been spent absorbing instability so others could feel calm, how I had mistaken that role for love. I understood now that stability borrowed from someone else's silence is not stability at all. That night I drafted a resignation letter. Not to a job, to a role. I am no longer the quiet fixer. I am no longer the invisible buffer. I am no longer responsible for smoothing consequences I did not create. I saved the document and closed my laptop. The story everyone expected to end with revenge had ended instead with boundaries, with clarity, with a system correcting itself once I stepped aside. And for the first time, the future felt open. Not because everything was resolved, but because I no longer needed it to be. The first real sign that my family understood the finality of what had happened came without confrontation. No calls, no messages, no attempts to renegotiate the past. Instead, there was distance, deliberate and careful, like people learning how to move around a wound they no longer wanted to touch. My mother stopped writing drafts of explanations she never sent. My father stopped asking what could have been done differently. Jason stopped forwarding articles, opinions, hypotheticals. Silence settled not as punishment, but as acknowledgement. I noticed the change most clearly the day I went back to Lake Mendota alone. It was late afternoon, the water nearly flat, winter sunlight stretched thin and pale across the surface. The private dining room, where the retirement dinner had been held, stood quiet behind darkened windows. No event banners, no reserved signs, just another building doing nothing. I sat on a bench near the shoreline and let the cold seep through my coat. For years, moments like this would have triggered a mental inventory. What was unresolved? Who needed reassurance? Which problem would surface next if I wasn't vigilant? That reflex didn't come. Instead, there was space. The city released a supplemental memo that afternoon, less formal than the report, but no less significant. It outlined implementation steps for the new governance structure and confirmed that family members would hold no advisory or decision-making roles going forward. Permanently. I read it once and closed it. This wasn't a loss, it was an ending. That evening, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Nora, she said, her voice quieter than I remembered it ever being. I won't keep you long. I stayed silent. They finalized everything today, she continued. It's over. Yes, I said. She took a breath. I want you to know I didn't expect it to feel like this. Like what I asked. Empty, she said. I looked at the darkening sky outside my window. That's what happens when control is mistaken for purpose. She didn't argue. I keep thinking she went on if I had slowed down, listened. But you didn't, I said gently. And that's the reality we're in. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to relate to you now, she admitted. That makes two of us, I replied. Her voice wavered slightly. Do you think someday? I let the silence answer before my words did. I think I said carefully that any relationship we have now would have to be built without expectations, without roles, without me fixing anything. She exhaled shakily. I don't know how to do that. I know, I said. We ended the call without resolution, and for once I didn't feel the urge to chase one. In the weeks that followed, my life continued to expand in small, unexpected ways. I accepted a promotion I had previously declined because it would have required travel. I started saying no without explanation. I stopped anticipating disappointment before it happened. At work, a colleague asked me how I stayed so calm during regulatory chaos. I don't confuse responsibility with ownership, I said. The words surprised me as they left my mouth. They felt earned. One afternoon, I received a short email from the city compliance officer who had interviewed me twice. Final report filed. Thank you for your professionalism. That was it. No praise, no apology, just closure. I printed it and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Not to preserve it, but to stop revisiting it. Jason reached out once more weeks later. Mom says she misses you. I stared at the message. I'm not gone, I typed. I'm just not available the way I used to be. He didn't reply. On a quiet Sunday morning, I cleaned my apartment thoroughly. Not out of anxiety, but intention. I boxed old paperwork I no longer needed, shredded duplicates, threw away notes written in moments of urgency that no longer existed. At the bottom of one box, I found a copy of the original redevelopment framework, the one I had written years ago. The margins were filled with my handwriting, careful, precise, protective. I flipped through it slowly, then closed it and recycled it. I didn't need proof anymore. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote something new. Not plans, not contingencies, just truths. I am allowed to step back. I am allowed to let systems fail if they refuse correction. I am not responsible for other people's denial. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. What my family lost was not me. It was access. Access to my labor. Access to my silence. Access to the version of me that absorbed consequences so they never had to. And what I gained was not victory. It was alignment. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for the next collapse. I was standing somewhere solid. The story wasn't over yet, but the cycle was. The weeks after everything ended were harder than the weeks when it was still falling apart. During the collapse, adrenaline had given me purpose. There were emails to answer, timelines to track, decisions to make about when not to intervene. Once it was over, there was only quiet. And quiet has a way of forcing honesty you can't outrun. I began noticing how deeply my old role had shaped my instincts. How often I still reached for my phone when it buzzed, expecting a crisis that no longer belonged to me. How my body stayed tense even on calm mornings, as if bracing for impact that never came. Letting go wasn't a single decision. It was 1,000 small refusals to step back into familiar pain. One Tuesday afternoon, I received a message from the city. Not from compliance, from planning. They were assembling a new advisory panel for a different redevelopment project unrelated to my family. A clean slate, new safeguards, independent oversight. Someone had recommended my name, citing my demonstrated integrity under pressure. I stared at the screen for a long time. This was the irony I hadn't prepared for. The system I had stepped away from was offering me a way back in on my terms. I asked for 24 hours to think. That evening, my father called. He sounded calmer than he had in months, like someone who had finally stopped fighting gravity. Your mother started seeing a counselor, he said quietly. That's good, I replied. She says she doesn't know who she is without committees and titles, he continued. I leaned against the counter. Neither did I at first. He hesitated. She keeps asking if you'll ever forgive her. I closed my eyes. Forgiveness isn't the issue, I said. Access is. He was silent. You can forgive someone and still decide they don't get to shape your life, I added. I think she's starting to understand that, he said. I hoped so, but understanding didn't obligate me to return. The next morning, I met with my supervisor for coffee. She had watched everything unfold from a distance, careful not to cross professional boundaries, but not blind. You've changed, she said, in a good way. I stopped being afraid of consequences, I replied. She smiled. That's rare. I told her about the invitation from the city, and she asked, I don't know if I want to step back into something adjacent to my past, I admitted. She considered that. Maybe the question isn't whether it reminds you of what you lost. Maybe it's whether it reflects who you are now. That stayed with me. I accepted the position with conditions: clear authority, defined scope, independent reporting lines, written boundaries that could not be blurred by familiarity or guilt. They agreed without hesitation. That was how I knew this was different. When my mother found out, she didn't call right away. 3 days passed before her name appeared on my screen. "I heard you joined another board," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Doesn't it feel strange?" she asked, "after everything?" "No," I said honestly, "it feels clean." She was quiet for a moment. "I wish I had listened to you," she said. "I wish you had respected me," I replied. Those two things were not the same. We ended the call politely, distantly, like people acknowledging a history they could no longer rewrite. As autumn edged closer, my life took on a rhythm I didn't recognize at first. Evenings were no longer consumed by contingency planning. Weekends were open. I began taking long walks without headphones, letting my thoughts wander without direction. One afternoon, while sorting through old files, I found an email draft I had never sent years ago. It was addressed to my mother explaining concerns about early governance shortcuts. The tone was careful, gentle, afraid of offending. I deleted it without reading the rest. That version of me had done her best with what she knew. She didn't need to justify herself anymore. The new advisory role moved slowly, deliberately. Meetings focused on process, not personalities. Disagreements were documented, not suppressed. For the first time, I saw what it looked like when accountability was shared instead of outsourced to the most conscientious person in the room. One evening, after a long meeting, a fellow panel member turned to me and said, "You're very clear about when something is not your responsibility." I smiled. I learned the hard way. Driving home, I realized something that startled me with its simplicity. I no longer felt the need to be right. I didn't need validation from my family, from institutions, from anyone. I needed alignment between my actions and my values. That was enough. The past hadn't disappeared. It never would. But it no longer dictated my posture toward the future. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And that I understood now was the real consequence my family never anticipated. Not the investigation, not the resignations, not the reports and statements. The real consequence was that I had learned how to live without needing their approval. And once you learn that you don't go back, you move forward. The final shift didn't arrive with a phone call or an apology. It came quietly on a cold morning in early spring when I realized I had gone an entire week without thinking about my family at all. Not in anger, not in vigilance, not even in disappointment. They had become context instead of gravity. I noticed it while standing in line at a coffee shop near my office. The barista misheard my order, and for a moment I felt the old instinct rise, the reflex to smooth things over, to accept inconvenience so no one else felt uncomfortable. Then I corrected her calmly. She fixed it without drama. We both smiled. The world didn't crack open. That was when I understood how deeply trained I had been to disappear. The new advisory board met that afternoon. The agenda was dense, the stakes high, but the tone was different from anything I had known before. No one deferred to hierarchy out of fear. No one rushed decisions to protect egos. When concerns were raised, they were documented instead of dismissed. Halfway through the meeting, a junior analyst spoke up, hesitant but prepared. She pointed out a potential conflict buried deep in a proposed vendor agreement. The room went quiet. I watched her brace herself, expecting resistance. Instead, the chair thanked her. The issue was logged. The item was tabled. I felt something loosen in my chest. After the meeting, the analyst approached me. I almost didn't say anything, she admitted. I didn't want to slow things down. "You didn't slow anything down," I replied. "You prevented damage." She smiled, relieved. Walking back to my car, I realized how rare that moment would have been in my old world. How often caution had been framed as obstruction. How many times I had absorbed that pressure silently so others could feel decisive. I didn't miss it. That evening my mother called. I answered not out of obligation, but choice. "I heard about your board work," she said. "People say you're doing well." "I am," I replied. She hesitated. "I've been thinking a lot." I stayed silent. "I keep replaying that dinner," she continued. "The night we told you we were simplifying things." "Yes," I said. "I didn't see it as replacing you," she said softly. "I saw it as freeing you." I closed my eyes. "You didn't ask what I wanted," I said. "You decided what was convenient." She exhaled slowly. "I know that now." The admission was small, imperfect, and long overdue. I didn't rush to fill the space it left. "I don't expect things to go back," she added quickly. "I just didn't want you to think I never cared." I considered my answer carefully. "I don't think you never cared," I said. "I think you cared in ways that required control." She didn't argue. "I'm learning," she said quietly. "Very late." "Yes," I replied, "but still learning." We ended the call without promises, without resolution, without emotional bargaining. It felt appropriate. Weeks passed. The final administrative closures from the Redevelopment Trust faded into footnotes. New leadership stabilized operations. The lakefront project moved forward under stricter oversight. My parents' names appeared less and less in civic spaces until they stopped appearing at all. Jason stopped calling entirely. Brooke sent a message once, tentative and brief, saying she hoped I was happy. I replied honestly that I was learning how to be. My life filled in around the space my family once occupied, not with distractions but with intention. Friendships deepened. Work felt purposeful without being consuming. I began making plans that extended further than the next crisis. One Sunday afternoon, I cleaned out the last box of documents from the ordeal. Drafts, notes, emails printed during moments of anxiety. I didn't reread them. I shredded them slowly, deliberately, listening to the steady hum of the machine. When the box was empty, I didn't feel loss. I felt completion. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote something new. Not a plan, not a contingency. A statement. I am not responsible for maintaining systems that exclude me. I am not obligated to protect people who silence me. I am allowed to step away without explanation. I folded the page and tucked it into a drawer. If you're hearing this story and recognizing yourself in it, in the quiet competence in the way responsibility was handed to you instead of respect, understand this. You were never meant to be the invisible backbone forever. You were never required to sacrifice your clarity for someone else's comfort, and you do not owe loyalty to systems that only function when you suffer in silence. The most powerful revenge isn't exposure. It isn't humiliation. It isn't watching someone else fall. It's reclaiming your life so completely that their approval no longer matters. I didn't destroy my family. I didn't take anything from them. I simply stopped holding everything together. And in doing so, I finally gave myself permission to live. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if it spoke to your experience. Subscribe for more stories about truth boundaries and rebuilding your life. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step back and let the truth finish the work.